Good evening, everyone. I'm Jay Coburn. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of the Community Development Partnership. And thank you for joining us tonight in this ongoing series of Zoom briefings that we have been doing since the end of March to update supporters of the Community Development Partnership the work that we're doing, and also do a little bit of a deep dive on a particular issue. I want to give a brief kind of update on some of the things that we've been working on over the last few months. We haven't held one of these since November. And then turn it over to our colleagues from the Cape Cod Commission staff to talk a bit about some of the data that the Commission has been collecting and exploring the topic of, are we seeing increased activity here on the Cape from an increase in year-round residents who are either relocating here or are utilizing their second homes as their primary residence, either permanently or temporarily, as I think many folks have speculated. So it's hard to imagine that it has been almost a year that we have been dealing with the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic and its economic challenges. We have about 7 of the 17 staff members of the CDP are working here in our offices in Eastham, and we're certainly going to kind of continue to work with that kind of ratio of people working at home and remotely versus working here for the foreseeable future. We also, I'm happy to report, even though our board approved last summer a FY21 budget that forecasted a need for us to dip into our reserves to the tune of about $150,000. I'm pleased to report that so far our year-to-date financials are suggesting that we are not going to need to dip into those reserves, thanks to really strong fundraising, and much of that credit goes to the great support that we've received from many of you on this call tonight. So I'm just really overwhelmed and very much appreciative of the incredible generosity of our community to ensuring that we as an organization can continue and intensify our work and have the resources to do that. I'm also pleased that our residents of our 100 affordable housing units, while some of them have been experiencing some financial distress, thanks to our partnership with the Homeless Prevention Council, that we have been able to help those families who have been facing a loss in income and challenges in paying their rent, to connect them with rental assistance programs and other support, and that we have not seen a significant downturn in our rental income from the 100 units that we own or manage. We've also launched a little bit later this year. Typically, we do our Housing Institute every fall, and we delayed that a bit, but we kicked off last Friday with our first session, which was a kind of overview of Housing 101, if you will. It was all done via Zoom, and we had over 40 local elected and appointed municipal officials and town staff working on affordable housing challenges participate in that 2-hour session. On the small business front, you'll recall that we received or were awarded a contract for the town of Truro to run a regional community development block grant funded micro enterprise forgivable loan program. And we are continuing to move out that close to $400,000 in funds. To date, we've funded 24 small businesses to the tune of $228,000. These are really our most vulnerable small businesses on the Lower Cape, in that the business owners, in order to qualify, have to be of low to moderate income. And we are able to provide up to $10,000 in a forgivable loan to these businesses, which has been a real lifeline for many of them, because they're either small, or the nature of their business is that some of the other relief programs, such as the payroll protection program, weren't always a good fit for those businesses. We anticipate moving out the rest of the funds over the next month. We still have about 25 applications that we're going through and working with the business owners to collect the necessary documentation that we have, since this is a federally funded program. We also this week went back and looked at the data in payroll protection program loans that came to the Outer and Lower Cape, and identified the businesses that we worked with to help them complete those applications and evaluate those programs. And we had a total of 55 businesses that we worked with in particular, but we have 26 who were able to secure forgivable payroll protection loans to the tune of $716,000. That has also been a real lifeline for these businesses, and that we are continuing to help small businesses now that the latest federal relief bill that was signed at the beginning of January contains additional payroll protection funding with a number of important changes that I think are really helping small businesses. So we're helping either businesses that have already received payroll protection funds through round one, or may be eligible through the new criteria in round two, access these funds. So lots going on here with our great staff supporting our small businesses. I don't know about you, but it seems to me things are a bit busier on the Cape, on the Lower Cape this summer, and that the usual very quiet, I live in Provincetown, and so I'm used to walking in neighborhoods with no lights on, and there seem to be more lights on. So we thought it might be helpful to delve into this topic and see what the data might tell us. Are in fact we seeing folks who either own second home here move into those homes either temporarily or permanently, or with the booming real estate market, is that resulting in folks relocating into a less densely populated place such as the Lower Cape? And so to help us with that, I'm really pleased to have Jen Clinton and Chloe Schaefer here from the Cape Cod Commission staff, who've prepared a really great presentation. Jennifer is the Community Development Planner for the Commission, and she focuses on economic development, including the development and implementation of Cape Cod's comprehensive economic development strategy, sometimes called the SEDS document. And she also analyzes data trends for the region and works with stakeholders on local and regional planning topics. And her colleague Chloe Schaefer is the Commission's Chief Planner and oversees the agency's planning and community design projects. She collaborates and supports the implementation of the regional policy plan, as well as the SEDS document and other regional initiative plans, and helps provide technical planning assistance to our communities on Cape Cod, including data analysis and visualizations. And so with that, we'll turn it over to Jen and Chloe. If you, hopefully most of you are familiar with the chat function on Zoom, and I'd like to encourage you, as we're going through the presentation and questions might come up that you would like to ask Jen and Chloe, if you could type them in the chat, and then we can, when we turn it over, do that a little bit more efficiently. And of course, if we run out of questions and you still have questions, we can work to have you unmute and speak up. But with that, Jen and Chloe, welcome and thank you so much.
Great, thank you very much for having us. I'm going to share my screen here. All right. So good evening. My name is Chloe Schaefer. As Jay mentioned, I'm joined by my colleague, Jennifer Clinton. And we are going to share with you what we've been digging into in terms of data to really try and understand how the COVID-19 pandemic could be impacting our population on the Cape. Just very quickly, for those of you who aren't familiar with us, the Cape Cod Commission is the regional planning agency for Barnstable County. And our mission really focuses on keeping a special place special through balancing our relationship with environmental protection with economic progress. So we do a lot of work around data and tracking regional data trends. And we have been looking throughout the pandemic as well at various data sources. Earlier in the spring last year, to help with this, we launched the Cape Cod COVID-19 data dashboard. It's available online, and on this website, there are several different interactive data dashboards on a variety of topics, such as traffic trends, real estate, unemployment, some of the things we are going to get into tonight, as well as results from some of our business impact surveys that we've conducted that to get a handle on how the pandemic has been impacting our local businesses. So I'm first going to dive into, though, our traffic trends. And a common theme I think you'll see throughout our presentation tonight is we haven't really found necessarily a straightforward answer to how the pandemic is influencing our population. There's a lot of kind of complexity in what's happening, and a lot of the data is showing perhaps some things that might be surprising in some instances, but we think is probably due to the significant changes in our lifestyles. And I think traffic is a great place to start because I think we can all relate to the fact that we're doing so many more things virtually, like this, for example, and probably driving less. So this is showing crossings over the canal bridges from 2019 compared to 2020. We were initially up actually for January and February this year, or of 2020 compared to 2019. But of course, can see really a significant drop starting in March and April. We did start to inch back towards 2019 levels as we went through the summer and through the rest of 2020. But as you can see, there's actually still fewer crossings than 2019, again, probably due to the fact that we are generally traveling less. We do have data for more specific locations throughout the region as well. And so this is Route 6 at the Wellfleet and East Hamtown line. And I think this one is particularly interesting. You can see that there was a drop in 2020 compared to 2019 through August. But then when we look at the fall, September and October in particular, there was actually an increase in traffic at this location. And so I think while we can't necessarily say directly or definitively from this whether that was second homeowners who were here longer, people coming and visiting either for the day or staying overnight, it does point to the fact that there was increased activity in the area, especially in that shoulder fall season this past year. Another interesting one is actually looking at bicyclists and pedestrian data, and this is on the Cape Cod Rail Trail in Brewster. And as you can see, really significant increase through the summer, but this trend really continued throughout all of 2020. And the increase of 2020 compared to 2019 was dramatic when you look at September through December. Again, though, understanding how we might be living slightly differently due to the pandemic, perhaps taking more advantage of recreating outside, it's hard to pinpoint exactly whether this is pointing to a direct increase in population, but certainly speaks to a very strong increase in activity in that area. Another area that we have data available on the Data Cape Cod website is in terms of real estate. And I know we've all probably been hearing and seeing a lot about the real estate market. And so here are some statistics comparing 2020 to 2019. The number of new listings, this is for Cape Cod as a whole, was down a little bit, but closed sales were actually up. And when we look at the number of homes that were available for sale at the end of the year, it was down significantly, over 50% in 2020 compared to 2019. So certainly less or fewer homes available on the market and more that we're selling. And when we look sub-regionally, this is for the Outer Cape here. New listings were down slightly. Closed sales were actually up more significantly there. And then the year-end inventory of homes was also down just over 50%. The Lower Cape is fairly similar, although we can see there is actually a very slight increase in the number of new listings in 2020 compared to 2019. But again, the closed sales up by over 30% here, and year-end inventory down nearly 60%. And in terms of what these homes were selling for, we also looked at median sales price. This went up for most of the towns. Here you can see the Outer Cape towns, Provincetown, Wellfleet, and Eastham all saw an increase in the median sales price, as well as an increase in the number of closed sales. That's that number in the bar here. When we look at the Lower Cape, the increase in median sales price for these 4 towns actually went up by even more. Orleans going up by over 28%, as you can see there. And most of these homes already in 2019, the median sales price, of course, already very high and only increasing in 2020. And while those were looking at the yearly totals, we do have available online month-over-month totals for the county as a whole, as well as for individual towns. And this is on the Data Cape Cod website. And you can compare 2020 to 2019 within a town, as well as looking at one town compared to another if you're interested. And so I would invite you all to take a look at that, play around, and of course, let us know too if you have any questions or feedback on that. I wanted to share that. Next, I'm going to be turning to some data that we're currently in the process of both collecting and analyzing. So this is preliminary, but we've been looking at the amount of water pumped by suppliers across the Cape. We currently have data from about half of the water suppliers, I believe. And there was, as you can see here, the yellow line is 2020 and the blue is 2019. And we do see an increase starting especially in May and continuing throughout most of the year when looking at all of the suppliers that we have data for here in aggregate. This is complicated a little bit by the fact that we were in a drought year, so it's a little hard to say how much of this might be due to an increase in population and potentially due to an increase, excuse me, in people using water for irrigation when we look more regionally. However, there are a couple of places, Provincetown, where there are more restrictions on using water for irrigation during a drought. And when we look at the data for Provincetown, it actually was lower than 2019 for much of the year. However, again, looking at that September and October area, we do see that it was up over 2019. When we look at Chatham, which also has some restrictions that might make this less susceptible to swings due to drought, we also see an increase, really significant increase starting in June, particularly in terms of water use, continuing throughout the summer somewhat, and then also pretty strong in September and October again in that shoulder season there. And we do see a similar picture as well in Orleans so far. And so now I'm going to hand it over to Jen, who's going to talk through some of the other data points we've been looking at.
Thank you, Chloe. So another source of data that we're looking at is the electricity use, both residential and commercial, shared by Cape Light Compact. And we'll step through the regional data that we have, as well as the sub-regional information. So here you can see on the y-axis is kilowatt per customer or household. And this is specifically residential. So you can see a trend starting in April where the darker shade of blue that is 2020 over the lighter shade of blue 2019, you can see a per household increase in residential electricity usage. And so we think this might be reflective of the number of people that are working from home. We're not sure if that means there's additional people versus increased residential use for customers that already existed, but we're working on trying to dig a little bit deeper into this data. If you could go forward one, please. And so when you contrast that trend with the commercial electricity usage, you can see over the same time period, starting in around April, you see a comparable decrease in commercial electricity usage. So that might lend itself to indicating that that's a shift in the work from home versus working in a business location. One forward. So when you're looking at the Outer Cape, we are still working on getting the rest of the fall data, but we do see a marginal increase in September. So I'm curious to see once we do get the next set of data, whether or not that sort of tracks with that increased water usage that we're seeing. You do see a spike in August as well. One forward. And for commercial, on the Outer Cape, we are seeing a significant increase in 2019 compared to last year. So I think this might be reflective of the pandemic for sure. One thing we learned in our business survey, we asked people, business owners specifically, how they primarily interacted with their customers, and many of the Outer Cape and Lower Cape businesses, I think over 80% said that most of their interaction was in person. And so that really reflects the tourism and hospitality concentration that we have on Cape Cod. And I think once those businesses were closed down, either by choice or because of trying to, hibernate, as they're calling it now in the winter, we are seeing that there were significant decreases on the Outer Cape and Lower Cape compared to the Upper Cape. One forward, please. So we're looking at the Lower Cape residential here. Similar to the Outer Cape, we're seeing an increase in August and September. And one forward, as well as that the commercial decrease that we're seeing starting in April, really in earnest. Next, please. Another data set that we're considering is the public school district enrollment. We currently have year over year for October 2019 versus 2020. Although we saw a slight increase from year to year in Provincetown, we are seeing a decrease in the regional school systems, as well as Orleans and Brewster. This is a difficult one, partly because we think some of the impacts of the pandemic will really be felt in 2021 data that we don't have available yet. So we're hoping for an update to that sometime between June and August. But when we do look back further at public school enrollment, this is also sort of in line with the regional trends we're seeing over the same time period. Barnstable County saw a decrease of around 4% year over year. And looking back even further, over 10 years, we're seeing around 8% for the Outer Cape and around 5% for the Lower Cape, a decline. So this may be a continuation of an existing trend more so than a reflection of the pandemic. Another thing that we have further back, but not for more recent data, is trends in homeschooling. So once we have a new data set, we might be able to show changes in whether or not people were pulling the kids from school and homeschooling rather than enrolling them in public school, or another consideration would be if they were a second homeowner and they might live in Boston but are on the Cape for the summer. Those wouldn't necessarily be reflective because the kids are able to go to Zoom school on the Cape. So we wouldn't necessarily be able to see the trends in increased enrollment here. One forward, please. So in addition to collecting that extra data as it becomes available, we're also trying to collect some primary data ourselves in terms of a second homeowner survey. The Commission has conducted two previously, one in 2008 and another in 2017. So one thing that has been consistent for each of these is that we ask a core set of questions about their second home, including their use and planned uses, planned changes, home description. But for each of those past second homeowner surveys, they've also sort of centered around a theme. The first being wastewater, the second being coastal resiliency. So in this one, what we're hoping to do is focus on the pandemic. So in addition to second homeowners, we're also going to ask them questions about, also going to direct the questions to individuals who purchased homes this year. So we can get a sense of what their short-term plans are and long-term plans, why they located on the Cape. Are they employed here? Do they bring a remote job with them essentially? Or are they looking to enroll their kids in school here? So what are the potential impacts to services? So we're working on a draft of this draft survey, and we are planning to work on this over the next few months. That would give us a better sense and primary data collection really that can help us refine our answers to who is here and how long they're here and what that means for Cape Cod. One more, please. So like Chloe said, a lot of this data we've been collecting, we're refining and sharing on datacapecod.com where possible. We're continuing to collect electricity and water use data. Like she mentioned, we have about half the water suppliers on the Cape. We're continuing to add those. We're also adding additional layers to the electricity data so we can track more specific changes to accounts and see whether or not there's changes in account numbers. We're also considering additional data sources, and we would love any suggestions that the group might have for places we could look. I think, like Chloe suggested, this is sort of an ongoing research project, but one that's critical to understanding what the Cape is going to look like in the short term and long term. So thank you very much.
Jen and Chloe, thank you so much for your presentation. So again, if you've got some questions or comments from Jen or Chloe, or either type them in the chat or just type your name in the chat and I can call on you. Let me kick us off. Jen and Chloe, so we had a chance to talk last week a bit about some of this data in preparation for this presentation. And one of the things we discussed was how the Nantucket, through a really innovative project the island has called the Nantucket Data Project, has been using cell phone usage data as a way of getting a better handle on what their year-round population actually is, as well as looking at where their visitors are coming from. Is that a data source that is available to the Commission? And if so, are there some things you think we might be able to learn from that to kind of further help kind of measure this change in activity, or what we're kind of anecdotally experiencing?
Sure. I can start, but Chloe, please interrupt me if you would like to edit and add anything. So we have looked at cell phone data in the past in collaboration with the Environmental Protection Agency. They were doing some research a couple years ago on beach visitation and trying to understand ecosystem services and how people use the beach and how they value the beach, looking at the Cape in particular. So they introduced us to a vendor who they could purchase data from, and they were sort of showing us behind the scenes of how they were doing their calculations. So we are learning a little bit more about that data. We have recently submitted an application for a grant that would allow us to purchase some of that information. So we are very hopeful that that will be able to help us get a sense of what's going on. One thing that's really interesting, that's a bit of a wrinkle in the data right now, is that the information they collect, they actually purchase from third-party apps, and the apps use anonymous data. They don't tell us anything necessarily about the person other than the location. So one thing that was interesting in our conversations with them is that they are able to tell you where the phone typically resides. So we're able to see a map sort of where these people are coming from on Cape Cod. But the way they determine where the source is actually where the phone sleeps overnight. So while we might be able to say a particular cell phone, while we know nothing about it except that it normally sleeps in Connecticut, once that person starts to live on Cape Cod, either because they're a second homeowner who moved here because they can work remotely or because they purchased a home here, all of a sudden they become a Barnstable County resident. So we're going to have to do a little bit of research to pull those individuals out of the massive data so we can understand and quantify exactly how many people are in that cell phone data set that have moved here, and we can track to see whether or not they're here for the whole summer, the shoulder season, or if they eventually move back to their hometown once the pandemic ends, or they get their vaccine. So yes, the short answer is yes, we are hoping to get that data. We've applied for a grant that will allow us to purchase that, and hopefully in the coming weeks, we will know either way whether we get it or not.
Great. Thank you, Jen.
Mm-hmm.
Questions or comments? Come on, this is usually not a shy bunch. So.
Is there any anecdotal stories that people have about what they're seeing in their neighborhood or not seeing that they expected to?
Fran McLennan has her hand up.
Okay, Fran.
I was just wondering about tracking part-time home ownership and year-round ownership. And don't you have the ability to do that?
You want me to jump in, Jen? That's where I think we're really hoping to get better data on that with the second homeowner survey that Jen mentioned at the end of the presentation. Certainly, there are sources like the census that provides us with households that are seasonal versus year-round occupancy. But while we're waiting for that data to come out, we're hoping to get kind of more of that primary firsthand data from the second homeowners themselves with that new second homeowner survey. Jen, I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about how we're identifying the recipients of those surveys. Like, you know, I think we're planning to take a two-prong approach there, where we're going to identify the part-time owners by where there's a difference in the residential address and the mortgage address, you know, where their bill is getting sent, and then you can tell that they're not necessarily there full time. And then for the new homeowners, we're hoping to collaborate with the Cape and Island Realtors, I believe, to identify home purchases in 2020. So that should give us a pretty robust data set that'll give us a count of homes, but not necessarily how many people live in them. That will come from the survey.
Jen, can you also look at that different? I'm just wondering, you know, if mortgage data could be somewhat problematic given the number of cash buyers of second homes. Can you also look at that differential that occurs in terms of where the real estate tax bill is sent?
That's a good question.
Just from experience and as a select board member and looking at our own database, you know, that the field cards of homeowners will have the address here on the Cape Cod of the actual property, but often the address on record at town hall is in Boston, Connecticut, New York, where the tax bill is getting sent, and that's, I think, often can be a good indicator of that it's a second home. You know, particularly if you also look and see that the personal property tax is also being charged on that dwelling, which is a tax that's only levied to part-time residents and not year-round residents. Or in the case of the towns that have residential property tax exemptions, that's another way to differentiate between year-round residents and part-time resident property owners.
Mhm. Thank you.
Alan, you had your hand up.
Yeah, just a couple of comments. I guess I'm speaking as a water and sewer commissioner in Orleans today. I would be very careful about the water usage. Really, and we've tracked it for years here, it is so seasonal dependent. And up until a couple of months ago, the town of Orleans only sent out water bills semi-annually. So you got the winter and half the summer and vice versa. So you really couldn't tell what's going on. Now, however, we are 98% towards installing electronic meters.
Mhm.
That allows us to track this on a quarterly basis. And I think that will be really helpful. And we've, as part of our wastewater planning project, we've really dug into the relationship between water meters and assessors data and so forth. So going ahead, I think we'll have some pretty interesting information. As Jay mentioned, the assessors are watching who lives here year round and who is seasonal, because it's money in their pocket when they can get a seasonal homeowner because they pay an excise tax on contents. So the assessors are somebody to talk to. And the last thing is just a comment, because Orleans is paying for a significant portion of its wastewater bill, $60 million now. We set aside 6% of our hotel motel tax and 6% of our short-term rental tax into a stabilization fund. And we track it on a quarterly basis. Or at least I do, because I'm sort of fascinated with it. I will tell you that during the last year, starting in June, before June, the market disappeared. I had all sorts of friends who had second homes that were being leased. In mid-March, every single one of those commitments walked away. And when things were opened up in late May or June, those friends were booked within 24 hours, 100%. And when you look at the revenue that has come in, what has happened in the town of Orleans is that the hotel motel tax is tracking at about 80% of what had been highly predictable for 15 or 20 years. And the short-term rental tax is close to 4 times what we projected it to be a year ago. So there's a significant change in how these properties are being used. And all the towns are tracking, the Cape Cod Commission tracks it as well. So the information is there. And just one other thing, Fran and I live on a street that doesn't have very many year-round residents on it. But it's been really fascinating this fall and winter. There are now people here with baby carriages and young children. And you stop and you talk to them at a distance. Well, we bought a house here and now we're living here and working remotely. Well, what are you going to do as the year goes on? Well, in the summer, we're going to go back to Boston and we're going to rent our house. So it's sort of a reverse market that has been created. And I think it's something that needs to be tracked. And clearly Cape and Islands Realtors are tracking this as well. So as does Cape Cod Chamber of Commerce. So just some comments based on what we've experienced here.
So Jen and Chloe, the water data that you looked at, was that wasn't necessarily derived from bills, but that was actually what was pumped and used by the system?
That's correct. That was pumped from the aquifer.
Okay.
And just Jay, to follow up on that, a dry season the usage goes up because people are watering their lawn, and our water department tracks it, and you can predict what's going to happen based on the weather.
Paul Benson, who from the Provincetown Independent, is with us. Paul, you did an article a couple of weeks ago about short-term revenue. I think it was you who wrote the article. Did an article on short-term rental income in the 4 Outer Cape towns. Do you mind my putting you on the spot just to share a little bit about what that looked like? You just unmute yourself if you want.
Now I'm unmuted. No, it's fine. Thank you. Yeah, we did look at the changes to, it's tricky because it's the rooms occupancy tax that already existed, but the number of licensed lodgings are pretty flat. So we did attribute most of the changes to the existence of short-term rentals. There was a 1.7 million of new tax income in Provincetown. I think it was 600,000 in Truro, 700,000 in Wellfleet, and 800,000 in Eastham of new tax revenue. And that was in the year 2020, which of course was a pandemic year. It's interesting. I don't know who the speaker was, but someone pointed out that licensed lodging revenue might be down while short-term rentals actually gained at the expense of licensed lodging, but that's a whole nother ballgame. I want to note that Provincetown hasn't been able to break out that revenue into the 2 categories, but there's a sense that the DOR, the Department of Revenue, might be able to separate out that tax. And especially if you're talking about allocating all the new tax revenue, saying, well, this is our licensed lodging tax, we're going to leave that where it was, but we want to use the short-term rental tax differently. And you would sort of need DOR to help you break that apart, which is something I'm still trying to find out how that's done. If anyone knows the answer, please let me know.
Steve Barr asks about the license plate or the data of cars coming over the bridges. And apparently there's pretty good surveillance of those cars that you could track out-of-state license plates versus in-state license plates. Any information there, Jen or Chloe?
I believe that the data that we have in the Data Cape Cod right now is from, and Steve Tupper is our transportation director, he'd be able to answer this the best, but I think it's from the, and I don't know what the technical term is, but essentially those things that you drive over that check your speed. So we're not necessarily using cameras to detect the license plates. That's Mass DOT, I believe. So, but our counts are from understanding how many times someone has driven over one of those trackers.
Yeah, the data set that you're looking at, although it may exist somewhere else, that doesn't include that information.
Jen Cusack had a question.
And then we'll go to Carl. This is Jen.
I don't know if this is something that the Cape Cod Commission tracks or not, but more of an observation. We've talked to friends who own and run local businesses, and some are telling us it's the busiest and best year that they've ever had, and others are telling us it was the worst year and they're barely hanging on. Restaurants a little bit because of early on, but even some restaurant owners that we've talked to recently have been having a great second half of the year. I didn't know if that was something that you've looked at or that you do look at, or if that's more of a Chamber of Commerce issue.
I'll take that one too, Chloe. So this is actually a collaborative effort with the Chamber and the Commission. We did issue a couple business impact surveys to sort of get a sense of what the impacts might be. I can share my screen if that's okay. I'll do this briefly. But if you go to datacapecod.com, there is right here, under the second business impact survey, we're looking at things like the financial impacts to businesses and organizations. So you can see one of the questions we asked was what their year-over-year change in revenue is. And this is information you can drill down and look at the sub-regional level if you're interested. The only thing is this is of course representative of the people that responded to the survey. We had just over 400 people respond region-wide, but we are seeing, let me see, hello, I know the rest of the towns out there. We are seeing, the more red this bar is on the left, the worse they did. This is down more than 75%, and up here is the positive. So it really did depend on the kind of business and where they were located. We are seeing businesses that relied on that in-person interaction not doing very well. If they didn't already have some sort of online communications or ordering system, there was definitely a learning curve there. But we're also about to issue our third survey results. We finished that one up in December and January. And so this covers the first half of the year, which of course was the peak really impacts of the pandemic. But you can see once we started moving through our reopening phases, the state's reopening phases, that overall it did seem to ease up a little bit, that this is sort of like a worst case scenario right here. So we're hoping to issue that probably in the next week and a half. But I did want to let you know that there is some financial and operational and workforce impacts data on our businesses already posted to the site.
Great, thank you.
Thanks. Carl Sussman.
This data is fascinating. It's great that you pull it together. Looking at the electricity use, commercial versus residential, it's sort of hard to know whether that's because more people are on the Cape or whether people are just working at home. So the one that I found most interesting was the one of the traffic, not over the bridge, but the local traffic. I think that is more likely reflecting more people being around, because even while people were around, I think they traveled less, even locally. So I thought that was very interesting.
Yeah, I agree. I think especially the bike ped one really fascinated.
Yeah.
I was one of those people that purchased a bike in the pandemic. So I think that the more long-term we're able to collect this information, we'll probably get a better sense of the seasonality and whether these people are residents or if it's more of like a visitation thing, staying at an Airbnb.
And
Elaine
Jay,
McElroy from Wellesley, you had a question.
I put it in the chat. I didn't think I had to speak, but I guess I was just curious about data on the increase in the Airbnbs. I know we have the economic picture from Paul, which was, I really appreciate him working on really trying to drill down into that so that we can try to make some use of it to help deal with what some of these statistics we're seeing are creating. But I didn't know if you had any hard data on the increase in numbers of Airbnbs for each town or how many there are, if there's a real hard look at numbers.
Chloe, do you want to start or do you want me to?
I think this is in your bailiwick, Jen.
So Airbnb does not provide free downloads or easy downloads, unfortunately. So there are companies, one being AirDNA and another being Inside Airbnb, that can collate some of that information. Unfortunately, they cover Boston, but not the Cape. So I was just looking at their website when I saw your tab pop up, and it says on the bottom of Inside Airbnb in particular, if you'd like to request data, please let us know who you are, your interest, and he prioritizes it based on his alignment with their project's mission to promote debate about Airbnb's impact on residential housing. I don't think you'll find a better place to look at the impact of Airbnb than Cape Cod. So while the answer right now is no, I think maybe Chloe and I can bring this back to the commission and see if we can put in a request to get some data over time for Airbnb. So it's an option. I'm not sure what the cost would be yet.
I'm just going to briefly say AirDNA does have data for the Cape. It's not cheap data. We had a membership for a while as a newspaper, and then sort of when the phase 1, phase 2 reopening thing finished, we decided we would put it on pause for a while. But it can tell you the peak number of properties that were listed, like by month, so you can sort of see what the summertime peak is in any given town, and figure that there's plenty of homeowners that keep the the spring and the fall for themselves, but that August number is that's when you max out your revenue if you're doing weeklies. And we were able to tell in each town that we purchased a subscription for, sometimes that part might be free. I would try AirDNA. They have a free splash screen and you can get some good stuff off of that. You can see how many properties were listed, and you can get a sense of this. Last year was actually a little bit fewer. It was only about 80% of the properties went online, maybe 85%. And I just assume that's because a lot of people decided they wanted to leave the city themselves, so they couldn't rent it because they needed to be here.
Interesting. And you purchased every town? Or
No,
just
we cover 4. So for a couple months we had all 4, and then we scaled it back, and I actually kept my Provincetown subscription for a while because I'm curious and I had to.
Thank you.
Any other kind of questions and comments? We're getting close to 6. Paul, yeah.
I actually did have one in the chat, so I guess I'll just read it here. I always had a theory that the banks might have kind of some forecasting on the local banks because they hold their mortgages, because they're so exposed to our residential mortgage market, that they might want to know how properties might be hitting the market in future decades because they have to plan for that. And I have a theory that a lot of our rental housing in particular is properties that haven't sold since, say, 95 or 99 or so, you know, sort of at this prior pre-internet price point. And that some of those might be more likely to hit the market soon, and then you can have the rental inventory. I think you could actually see it reduce really dramatically within only about 10 or 15 years as properties turn over. But properties by year of the last arm's length sale is not a data set I've ever been able to find. So if you ever find it, you know, I'm a newspaper, but you're the commission. You kind of are, you're cooler than I am. And, you know, obviously banks aren't going to share their forecast with just anybody, but y'all are special. And it may be the case that someone has that data set of properties that are going to sell when they sort of think, you know, it would be some interesting work.
I'm looking at a potential list. We are collaborating with the Cape and Islands Realtors to try to understand some of the trends beyond what they have published in their fast stats and annual report. So I'm wondering if there's any information in there about that. But that's a good idea. Yeah, we could have some conversations with some of the community banks. I'm not sure about their forecasting and what they would be willing to share, but definitely worth the conversation.
I asked our assessor here, and he said because of the quality of data and what's online and what's not online, that he couldn't really make that database by most recent qualifying sale, which, you know, you're dealing with big numbers. You know, it's 4,500 properties just here. So it got out of my league.
Yeah, that'll keep you busy.
One of the interesting statistics that the Cape Cod Commission has on their town-by-town fact sheets is looking at via mortgage data. So keeping in mind that does not include cash sales of second homes, of which or primary or year-round homes either. But let's face it, there are a lot more cash sales of second homes. But as it looks at the difference in income between purchasers of year-round homes versus purchasers of second homes, and the gap that I would say it's pretty much kind of a town. You can look at it on a town-by-town basis, but it pretty much runs double. That the incomes of second homeowners are double that of year-round resident home purchasers here on the Cape. And again, if you go to the Commission's website, they have as part of their kind of profile on each of the different towns, looking at that data. But I think kind of helps us further make the case that, you know, our housing affordability challenges here are really rooted in the fact that our housing market has nothing to do with our local economy and the jobs and incomes that people who live and work here year round earn.
Jay?
Yes, Jen.
Somebody posted a question on the chat that hasn't been answered that I would love an answer to as well. Looks like Helene asked about collaboration with U.S. Postal Services and local post offices about mail forwarding and change of addresses. That's a really interesting question.
So I did take an initial look at this one to see if this would be possible. It looks like there is a data source similar to AirDNA. I think it's for purchase, but it tracks permanent change of addresses. So this would be people who have relocated here. It wouldn't necessarily give us a hint at any temporary ones. And if it was a temporary one, it might be someone located off Cape. right? If they were in Connecticut or something, they put a temporary one for 3 or 4 months while they moved into their second home. So I'm not sure how to identify, once they've temporarily requested, how to determine where they landed. But there is a data source for a permanent change of address.
Thank you. Well, with that, I want to thank Jen and Chloe, both of you, for a really interesting presentation and discussion, and thank all of you for your great kind of questions and comments. And I think we definitely want to have you back when the second homeowner survey is completed. But also, I think maybe in a month or two, let's have you come back and talk a bit about the small business surveys as you kind of crunch those numbers for a really interesting look at what's going on in our communities in these really challenging times. And thank you all for joining us tonight, and look forward to seeing you back again next month.